Good day, everyone. Good day, sir. I hope you're all safe and healthy. So, today I'll be discussing to you the Russian Federation, the largest country in the world and one of the most powerful country as well. So, Russian Federation was created or established after the disintegration of Soviet Union in 1991. So it can be considered as the successor of the Soviet Union. Russian Federation is characterized by various changes, transitions, and upheavals. Way back 1917, there is an important revolution happened in Soviet, the Bolshevik Revolution, which ended the Tsarist rule of Nicholas II. So, in this case, the revolution replaced the Tsarist rule with a political system that is dominated by a communist party. So, after Vladimir Lenin, another important leadership is the leadership of Joseph Stalin. So Stalin introduced various innovation, rapid innovation actually, in terms of industrialization, agricultural cultivation, and many more. But suddenly it was followed by loss of many lives associated with the World War II. Another important transition of the Soviet is during the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev, where he's trying to pull back the Soviet to a firm in a more liberal democratic principle. That's why he introduces the competitive election, increased political pluralism, and he reduces the dominance of the Communist Party. So, and he also revitalized the legislative branch of the government. So those were transitions made by Mikhail Gorbachev. In 1991, Soviet Union was already disintegrated, which led to the formation of Russian Federation. So since Russia was already independent during that time, they have to select a new leader, the first leader of Russian Federation. So the first leader of Russian Federation is Boris Yeltsin. He is the first president elected in office through the vote of the population. And the crucial point or turning point during his presidency is the adoption and development of new constitution, the 1993 Constitution. This constitution affirms to the liberal democratic governance. It respects civil liberty and civil rights of every individual, held multi-party election, and independent judiciary. However, this constitution also are evident or accused to be super presidential because it strengthens and broadens the power of the executive branch or the power of the president with few check and balances, which is, it seems abnormal because the president or the executive branch is one of the most crucial branch in the government, but yet there's only few check and balances. This constitution also enables the president to veto any legislation, but then his veto power can be override by the legislature if they could generate at least two-thirds of votes. But if they fail to do so, then the president will get what he wants. This constitution also gives power to the president to appoint its prime ministers and cabinet ministers and dismiss them in the service if he desires it. He can also abolish the state of Duma and call for a new election or referendum. He will act, the president will act as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces or the military forces of the Russian Federation, and he can declare martial law if the national interest of Russian Federation was threatened. So these were some changes introduced by Boris Yeltsin. So after Boris, since he is the president, he appointed Vladimir Putin as his prime minister. And when he resigned as the president, in 2000, Vladimir Putin was elected as president. And it seems that in his term, he is bringing the Russian Federation into soft authoritarianism. He appoints Dmitry Medvedev as his prime minister. And nung matapos na yung term niya and he is no longer qualified to run for presidency, he supports Dmitry to be the president, and Dmitry appoint Putin as his prime minister. And after 4 years term of Dmitry, Putin runs again as the president of the Russian Federation and he won. And many scholars accuse both of them that it seems there's a conspiracy, merong sabuatan, so that they can maintain their power in the Russian Federation. Now, Putin is the most powerful political actor in Russian Federation. Later in this video, we will discuss more about Russian Federation. So now let's proceed to the section 3 of this topic, which is governance and policymaking. Here, we will discuss and describe how Soviet was organized in the early times. So in the early times, Soviet is bureaucratic. When we say bureaucracy, the functions, duties, and powers of officials is already identified. They cannot go beyond limits. They cannot exercise power or authority which are not given to them. They cannot conduct programs or they cannot implement policies on how they desire it to be. They have to follow the supervision of their higher officials, the directives of their higher officials, or to follow stringently the rule of their organization or institution. That is bureaucracy. In the case of Soviet, it is hierarchical because the highest command came from the highest official going down. During those early times, Soviet was dominated by a Communist Party of Soviet Union. They run the entire Soviet. And their highest decision-making committee is the Politburo. And there's also a central committee which represents the political elites and regional party leaders and representatives of various economic sectors. On how they elect their official is the highest organ of their party was elected by the lower party bodies. And in return, yung highest party body naman, they will going to select potential candidates to be elected in the lower posts. And they have also a kind of system of personal selection, which they called nomenclatura. So in this kind of selection, they're selecting probable individuals who are politically reliable in a particular post. For example, in social or economic, including political position. So they are making a parsimonious selection for individuals which will be appointed in a very important position. So sa pamamagitan nito, they can control everything. They can run the Soviet on how they design it to be. So alongside the CPSU is the Soviet state structure. However, this structure is hindi masyadong powerful. They have less decision-making authority compared to the CPSU. There were also other structures or institution exist in the early time. For example, the Supreme Soviet and the Parliament. But this institution, it seems that they were just like a passage. They exist, but they don't have much authority in terms of decision making, because the control, the power is centralized to the Communist Party of Soviet Union. They run the entire Soviet on how they design it and on how they desire it to be. Talking about the constitution of the Soviet Union, since their political system is dominated by the Communist Party, their constitution became symbolic. Primarily symbolic na lang siya kasi its provision which separate the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, it seems like unnecessary because the power is already centralized to the Communist Party, acting and believing as they represent the interest of the people. So if the Constitution is violated, the court has no authority to defend and enforce its provision because the Communist Party has the control of everything. It oversees everything. Unlike on the other state, if we will going to compare it in United States or other democratic states where constitution are very important because it serves as guidelines and it delimit the states in abuse of power. In other states, constitution is very important, but in the early Soviet, it became symbolic because of the centralization of power, the concentration of power in the Communist Party. So now let's proceed to the innovation introduced by Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev is elected as president in 1990 by the Congress of People's Deputy. It is a victory, indeed a victory, for Gorbachev. However, along his presidency, he encountered various criticism from Communist Party and from the reformists like Boris Yeltsin. Actually, he exerted too much effort to free the Soviet Union from the clutches of the Communist Party, who is trying to monopolize the social, economic, and political system of the Soviet Union. And Mikhail Gorbachev introduces a new path for the Soviet Union by trying to introduce a new political system that is more democratic. Like, he introduced competitive election, increase political pluralism, and reduce the dominance of the Communist Party, as well as he revitalized the importance of legislative branch. However, despite of those efforts by Mikhail Gorbachev, hindi niya napigilan noong 1991. At the end, the Soviet Union was disintegrated after the end of Cold War. Continue, let me introduce to you who is Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin has been very popular and powerful from the beginning of 2000 when he was elected as president of the Russian Republic until to the present. He is the most influential person in Russia, and he have enjoyed consistently high level of public support since his first election. Somehow, there were various criticism and controversies concerning his administration or leadership that he is bringing Russian Federation into a direction of authoritarianism. However, Putin is very popular, especially for ordinary Russian citizens. They saw Putin as a hope for Russia to reestablish its role, its power in the international order, after painful years of economic decline, loss of international stature, and weak government in 1990s. Putin was born in October 1952, which is now the St. Petersburg, Russia's second largest city in the Soviet period. Putin pursued a career in the security service, the Community for State Security or the KGB, and was eventually assigned to duty in East Germany, where he remained there until 1990, not until the communist state was already in collapse. Little known until 1999, Putin's rise to political prominence was swift and rise in his popularity was equally meteoric. Upon returning to his home city, St. Petersburg, in 1990, Putin gradually became involved in municipal government, moving to Moscow in 1996 to take up a political post. Interestingly, in 1999, Yeltsin appointed Putin to be his prime minister, and shortly after that, he became acting president when Yeltsin resigned as president. While Putin, when he ran in presidential election in 2000, he won the presidency with 56.7% of votes, leaving his nearest competitor from the Communist Party. Since the Constitution limits a person to 2 consecutive terms as president, so ang ginawa ni Putin, he picked up a prime minister in the person of Dmitry Medvedev, where he supported Dmitry to run for presidency. And when Dmitry won the presidential election, he appointed Putin to be his prime minister. Then after Dmitry's term, so ang nangyari, si Putin nag-run ulit into presidential election. So this time, nagkaroon ng pagbabago sa Constitution. From 4 years term, naging 6 years term na ngayon. So that's why, because of that arrangement, there were various criticisms and accusation that Dmitry and Putin arranged their change of terms so that they could maintain their political power in Russian Federation. But despite of various criticism, he's very popular, especially for the Russian ordinary people. That's why he get the most desirable rating of above 60% since 2012 election, rising to above 80% in 2014 at the level of Western politician would envy. Some considered Putin to be the master tactician who have managed to achieve the pragmatic mix of control and flexibility, waving a political narrative that is contentious but persuasive to large part of his domestic audience. So although he is somehow bringing the Russian Federation into the direction of authoritarianism, but then he win the confidence, the trust, the heart of Russian people. That's why, despite of various criticism thrown to him, he has the most desirable rating or highest rating among other public officials. That's why he is called as master tactician. So let's proceed to the political institution of Russian Federation, which is comprised of executive, legislative, judiciary, and other subunits of political system. So we will discuss first the executive, which is composed of two executives, the head of the state and the head of the government. In this case, the head of the state is the president, and the head of the government is the prime minister. Unlike other states, for example in Great Britain, the head of their government is more powerful than the head of their state. Because in Britain, the head of their state, which is the monarch, were just a kind of symbolic position with less political power and authority, while their prime minister or the head of their government is in control of the political system. So in Russia, it's different. The president is the more powerful compared to the head of the government. The power is concentrated to the president. So, in Russia, the president can is the one who are going to appoint the prime minister or the head of the government, and he has also the power to dismiss the prime minister in office if he desires it. He has also the power to issue presidential decrees, which is the most contentious of all, because it can be used uh, to abuse power or to dominate other state, just like what Boris Yeltsin did in 1994 and repeated again in 1999 when he launched an offense against China without the approval of the either house. So, in addition to that, the president of Russian Federation has uh, the power to call for a state of emergency, impose martial law, grant pardons, call for referendum, and temporarily suspend action of other state organs if they are already violating the constitution or the federal laws. The president also will act as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces or the military forces of Russian Federation. And if the president dies, automatically, or if he dies or no longer capable to fulfill the mandate or the rule of being president, automatically his prime minister will act as the president or the head of the state. So, while on the other hand, the prime minister being the head of the government can be removed by Duma or by the lower house through repeated votes of no confidence passed within 3 months. So let's proceed to the national bureaucracy. The bureaucratic structure of Russian Federation is composed of state administrative of about 21 ministries and federal services and agents of about 20. The primary function of the ministries is on policy and political aspects, while the other state organs are concerned with monitoring and implementation, which include providing services to the public. However, despite of the reforms, there were various observers who still critic the bureaucratic system as it is inefficient because there were various government body who directly reports to the president. Example of this is the Foreign Affairs Ministry, the Federal Security Service, the Defense Ministry, and many others. The president also established various advisory bodies which helped him to collect informations about political actors, especially in the aspect of political and economic, which help him support the government. So here, he established the Security Council, which advises him in the areas related to foreign policy and security. Its members and size had varied over time, but has generally included heads of the so-called power ministries such as the Defense and the Federal Security Service, as well as other key ministries and government officials. So these ministries helps the president to maintain the stability of the political system, and as well as support the government so that it will reach economic prosperity. Okay, let's proceed to public and semi-public institution. When we say public institution, it is completely controlled by the state, and semi-public institutions are institutions where there's a sharing of ownership between the state and the private sectors. Even up to this time, this kind of system of ownership still exists, especially in the economic aspect or sector. Example of this is the telecommunication, the public transport, um, electronic media, and of course in the energy sector. To be specific, example of this kind of setup is the in the energy sector is the Gazprom, which is a natural gas monopoly in which the federal government controlled just over 50% of its shares, while the others are controlled by the private sectors. Another thing is the Rosneft, operating in the petroleum industry, where the state only owns nearly 70%. In other areas like education and healthcare, though there are uh, private facilities which are already constructed for medical purposes, and also private universities, but then the public uh, universities and healthcare services were still funded by the government through tax of the people. Let's proceed to the another major branch of the government of the Russian Federation, which is the judiciary. The concept of the judicial independence in Russian Federation and even in the early times is still poorly understood, and there were various questions. Is it really independent? Especially during the time of Vladimir Lenin, when the judicial branch, the constitution particularly, were just symbolic. They don't have power, they don't have authority. If the constitution is violated, then they cannot enforce their provisions, because the authority or the power is centralized to the Communist Party. Even in the contemporary time, in the leadership of Vladimir Putin, still there are questions by various political analysts, by even the citizens. Is the judicial branch really independent from the influence of the president, or they're just following orders from the president? Nonetheless, if we will discuss the judicial branch of Russian Federation, it has three courts. First is the Constitutional Court. There is also an appellate court and a commercial court. So let's start with the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court of Russia was formed in 1991. However, because of various controversies in its decision. President Boris Yeltsin suspended the operation of the court in late 1993. However, in the establishment of new constitution, Russian constitution, in 1993, they reestablished again the constitutional court with the power. So this time, it already had the power. So the power of the judicial branch is to adjudicate disputes on the constitutionality of federal and regional laws, as well as jurisdictional disputes between various political institutions. So, since 1995, since this time, medyo powerful na visibly ang judicial branch, it became a vehicle for resolving conflicts involving the protection of individual rights and conformity of regional laws with constitutional requirements. Next is the appellate court. So alongside the constitutional court is the extensive system of the lower court, or it is also called as the appellate court. So this court hears only ordinary civil and criminal cases. So mas mababa siya if we will going to compare it to the constitutional court. In addition, in 1995, a system of commercial courts was also formed. Ang function naman nito is to hear cases dealing with the issues related to privatization, taxes, and other commercial activities. So all judges of this court, the constitutional court, the appellate court, and the commercial court, ang lahat ng judge dito is appointed by the president. Then, the Federal Council will confirm the appointment of the president. So, kapag confirm na yung appointment, then that's the time na yung mga judges, they can fulfill and start to make their task or to fulfill their mandate. So, those are the courts in the judicial branch of Russian Federation. So, let's discuss the military security organ of the Russian Federation. So, since Vladimir Putin is a member of the KGB, now is the Federal Security Service, most of his staff and appointed individuals came from this arena. And evidently, during his presidency, there is an increasing role for security forces and an expansion of military forces of the Russian Federation. So what is the justification of Vladimir Putin in doing such? Ang justification niya is the series of the terrorist attacks na kung saan nagiging target yung mga schools, even the theater of Moscow was also targeted, the public transport, the Moscow airport, and many others. And the root of this terrorist attacks is from the separatist region of Chechnya, which is for a very long time, they are seeking to be independent, to be autonomous. However, even until to this time, they are still under the control of Russian Federation. This is not only the justification of Putin. Another justification niya is the attack on September 11, the terrorist attack on United States. Kasi hindi naman kaila sa atin na United States is the most powerful country in the world, yet napapasukan pa rin sila ng mga terorista. And these terrorist groups cause great or huge destruction to the United States. So, dapat lang na maalarma ang lahat ng mga bansa. Because if giants are afraid, how much more the dwarf? Before the attack, the terrorist attack in September 11, actually the focus of many countries is on development. development for themselves and also for the other countries. However, after ng terrorist attacks na yun, naging concern na rin ng almost all countries in the world and many agencies that they have to strengthen their efforts and alliances in battling against terrorism. So that is another justification of Vladimir Putin. So way back before, the Soviet military is just second ranked to the United States for having the most powerful armed forces in the world. However, in 1990, ito yung time na they are about to fall. So nag-reduce yung kanilang strength. In 2000 naman, since this is already the time of Vladimir Putin, there is an increase, including 2011, at 2012 rather. So in 2012, the Russian Federation is spending 4.5% of its GDP so that they could develop a more powerful armed forces. So 4.5% of GDP, that is very huge. So napakalaki na niyan. So even up to this time, there is still a mandatory service in Russian Federation. However, in 2008, the mandatory service was reduced from 2 years, naging 1 year na lang siya, and the women are no longer subject for the military draft. So there are changes in the system of their security organs. So let's proceed to the policy making process of the Russian Federation. So in crafting of their policy, there's a two process. The first one is the formal and the second one is the informal. So let's begin with the formal. It is formal because it is according to their constitution. It is written on their constitution. According to the constitution of Russian Federation, the federal government, the president, and his administration, including the regional legislature, individual deputies, and some judicial bodies, are allowed to propose legislation. So sila yung mga bodies na pwedeng makapag-propose ng legislation. And to pass, or in order for that bill to become a law, it must be approved by the both house of the parliament in 3 readings, and it should also be signed by the president. So dapat yung bill must be approved by the State of Duma and by the Federal Council and should be signed by the president. Now, if the president hesitates to sign that particular bill, he may use his veto power. If the president vetoed the bill, it doesn't mean na hindi na ito pwedeng maging law. Still, the legislature can override the veto power of the president by generating at least 2/3 of their votes. So if they can generate a 2/3 of votes, they can override the veto power of the president, and that particular bill, despite that it was vetoed by the president, can still become a law. In the informal process naman, this is actually prone for corruption, and it also hindered enforcement of policies, because in this kind of policy making, this is usually influenced by the business tycoons, especially during the time of President Yeltsin, where the business magnates were able to exert behind the scene influence to gain benefits from the privatization of lucrative firms and sectors such as oil, media, and transport. Pero si Vladimir Putin, he is committed to eradicate this irregular practice of the state, that according to him, the policy of the state must be out of the influence of the informal sectors. It should be a policy that will generate the most advantageous outcome for the state and for its citizen. This is also used by Vladimir Putin as a justification in centralizing power to the president, because he wants to eradicate this irregular practice of the state. Okay, let's discuss the legislative branch of the Russian Federation. The legislature of the Russian Federation is called Federal Assembly, which has two houses, the upper house and the lower house. The upper house is called Federation of Council, which represents Russia's constituent federal units. On the other hand, the lower house is the State Duma, which is composed of 450 members and involves a mixed electoral system. So what is mixed electoral system? It is actually a system in which a portion of the 450 members of the State Duma is elected through a winner-takes-all single members district, and the other portion is determined by their political parties according to the votes get by their parties in the national votes. So that is actually a proportional representation, which I will going to discuss to you later in the political parties part. So within the State Duma, there are factions of deputies. So to be specific, let's give an example. So in January 2014, of 450 members in the State of Duma, 237 of it, or 52.7%, were won by the United Russia, which is the dominant party in the Russian Federation, while the other seats are get by the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia. They have 56, 92 for the Communist Party of Russian Federation, while 64 for a Just Russia. So the same with the other countries, no, the legislative, the lower house rather, elects their speaker or a chair. For example, in December 2011, this has been the chair of the State of Duma is Sergei Naryshkin of the United Russia Party. Okay, let's discuss the upper house of the Federal Assembly, which is the Federation Council. So it has two members from each of Russian federal units and republics. So there are 85 federal subjects in Russian Federation. So bawat isa sa kanila, they will send two representatives. One representative for the legislative authority and the other one is for the executive authority. And aside from that, there will also be a representatives of Russian Federation whose members shall not exceed into 10% of the federal council members. Ito naman sila, they represent the legislative and the executive authorities of Russian constituents. Talking about the Constitution of Russian Federation, it grants power to the parliament in the legislative and budgetary areas. But if there is a conflict within the president or the government, the power can be exercised effectively only if the parliament operates with a high degree of unity. In the practice, the president can often override or bypass the parliament through mechanisms such as the veto of legislation or the use of decrees. So each house of the parliament has the authority to confirm certain presidential appointees. The Federal Council must also approve the presidential decrees relating to martial law and state emergencies, as well as to deploying troops abroad. So yun yung function. Yun yung authorities granted by the Constitution to the Parliament. So let's discuss the political parties and the party system of the Russian Federation. And let's compare it on what is it's different between the early Soviet. So as I mentioned early in this video, that the early Soviet is dominated by the Communist Party of Soviet Union. They dominate everything, not just the state organs, but as well as the other aspects of life and other institutions. Example of this is the mass media, the trade unions, youth groups, even educational institutions and professional associations. So they oversee everything, they control everything. Not until when Mikhail Gorbachev was elected in office as the president of the Soviet Union. Kasi during his time, he introduced various changes. And one of it is the competitive election. Now, from a single party, naging multi-party system. Many parties can already participate in the election provided that they meet the qualifications. Now, because there were many parties already who could participate the election, nagkaroon ng clash of ideas and principles, especially when it comes on economic spheres or economic aspects. For the communist socialist groupings, they argue for the continuous state role in providing social protection and benefits for vulnerable part of the population. Itong socialist nito, they are very statist. They see the state as the highest authority, and only the state could provide the best service. On the other hand, for the liberal reform groupings naman, they advocate more rapid market reform, including privatization, free prices, and limited government spending. So the liberal reform groupings, they advocate an economic system that is free from the state's control, or it has only less state's control. Kasi according sa mga liberal, nagiging mahirap ang isang bansa because of the absence of market economy or capitalism. But for socialists, only the state can give the best service, especially for the vulnerable part of the population. For the United Russia naman, this party is centrist. They are in the middle ground. They appeal to voters from a wide ideological spectrum. Political parties, they don't just clash in terms of economic aspects, but as well as in terms of national identity. For the nationalist patriotic parties, they emphasize the defense of Russian interests over westernization. So they resist from the influence of the Western culture. They favor a strong military establishment and protection from foreign and economic influence. Sabi naman ni liberal or reform parties, they advocate naman the integration of Russia into a global market and adoption of Western economic and political principles. Again, in this case, United Russia Party has articulated an intriguing combination of this viewpoint, which its leaders identifying Europe as the primary identity point for Russia, and at the same time insisting on Russia's role as a regional power pursuing its own unique path. So itong United Russia, most of the time, they are centrist. Pero ang pagiging centrist kasi ng isang political party, nakadepende yan on where it will gain the most advantageous outcome. They can be in the left or they can be in the right, for as long as the decision that they will going to make will be advantageous for their political party. Why they are the dominant party? Simply because they are supported by Vladimir Putin. So to reiterate, the traditional left, which is this one is the Communist Socialist Party, they are very critical on market reform and open, mildly nationalistic. Ang mga centrist naman is this one, example of this is the United Russia. They represent the political elites. While the liberal reform forces, they support assertive Western type of market reform and political norms. For the nationalist patriotic forces naman, primarily, they were concerned with identity issues and national self-assertion. In terms of dominance, the most dominant party in the Russian Federation is the United Russia. There are also other parties represented in the State Duma in 2007 and 2011. One of it is the CPRF, or the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. This party is the only party actually can be considered as the real opposition force. Ang party nito, their goals is to be democratic. They advocate justice, equality, patriotism, internationalism, a combination of civic rights and duties, and socialist renewal. And their primary among the party concern are the social cost of market reform process. So, talking about election in Russian Federation, like many other countries, this is very important because this is a time where the citizen can truly exercise their power and their rights to select who will be the person that will going to govern them. So talking about election, let's talk first about turnouts. Turnouts is a percentage of voters who participated in the election. The higher the turnouts, the better, because it indicates that most of the citizens participated in the election. In 2011 Duma election, there is about 60% of election turnouts, followed by 65% in 2012 presidential election. Same with other countries, the national election of Russian Federation received extensive media coverage because this is very important. Information about the progress of the election is very important for the citizen. We can also observe that there is various changes and revise in the electoral system of Russian Federation. In 2007, the electoral system for selecting the Duma is combined with proportional representation with a 5% threshold with winner takes all district. So what is proportional representation? Proportional representation is a party share of its seats in the legislature exactly or appropriately equal its share of the popular vote nationwide. For example, kung yung party, if the party gets 25% of the popular vote in legislative election, it will get 25% of the seats in the legislative. So that is proportional representation. In addition, voters were given the explicit option of voting against all candidates or parties. So, if you are a voter, then sa tingin mo, wala sa kanilang lahat, wala dun sa ballot yung karapat-dapat to lead or to govern the state, then you can choose the vote against all candidates. Aside from the changes in the electoral system in 2007, another revision happened in 2014 where the single-member district were abolished so that yung 450 na deputies ng State of Duma will be elected on the basis of one national proportional representation district with a minimum threshold of party representation raised to 7%. So dapat ang political party, they have to get at least 7% of the national votes. So in addition, as part of the changes during the time of Vladimir Putin, the presidency has only 4 years term, but in the beginning of 2012, from 4 years term, it became 6 years term, while the State Duma, from 4-year term, it became 5-year terms. Let's discuss the political culture, citizenship, and identity of Russian Federation. When communism collapsed, Soviet ideology was also discredited. And in 1990s, the government embraced Western political and economic values. If you can still remember, in 1917, during the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, communism is very powerful and very relevant. But during the time of Mikhail Gorbachev, there is a shift or transition in the political and economic values of the USSR, because when he won the presidency, it also signifies that the USSR will start to embrace and adopt Western political and economic values. However, many citizens and intellectuals are skeptical of this imported culture. They doubt on it because it conflicts with their traditional civic values such as egalitarianism, collectivism, and a broad scope for a state activity. Because the early Soviet, they really believe in egalitarianism, where it should be a state, a union that is classless and everybody is equal regardless of their social status or regardless of their educational attainment and many others. And they're also a believer of a collectivist idea where every individual should consider what is good for themselves and also for the others. And state for them plays a vital role, especially for the equality, for the delivery of service for all. On the other hand, public opinions based on surveys clash. There are citizens, or they call it subjects, who support the liberal democratic ideas or values such as independent judiciary, free press, basic civil liberties, competitive elections. But at the same time, they also desire for strong political leadership. And here comes Putin, who introduced a sovereign democracy. Sovereign democracy emphasized the importance of adapting democratic principles to the Russian context. So it should be sovereign, meaning it should be a democratic principle that is independent to the Western democratic principles, and it should adapt the traditional practices of the USSR or the Russian Federation. That's why it is sovereign democracy. In terms of citizenship, according to census in 2010, Russia now make up 77.7% of the population of the Russian Federation. And the largest minority group is the Tatars, which compose the 3.7% of the population. They are traditionally Muslim groups residing primarily in Tatarstan, one of the Russian republics. Other significant minorities are the neighboring Bashkirs, which compose the 1.1% of the population of the Russian Federation. In terms of language, there are over 50 languages spoken by at least 50,000 people in the Russian Federation, though evidently the lingua franca of Russian Federation is Russian language. Further, since Russia is a multi-ethnic state, one important aspect of the state is the search for identity. The Russian language itself has two distinct words for Russian. First is the Ruski, which refers to an ethnicity, and Russisky, a broader civic concept referring to people of various ethnic backgrounds who make up the Russian citizenry. While the political foundation of Russian Federation is based on the Russisky, meaning it refers to the people of various ethnic groups, not just particular to the Russian citizens. In terms of gender, it is generally assumed in the Russian Federation that women is the one who will carry the primary responsibility for raising and caring the child, and including they should have a certain standard of femininity that is expected in every women in Russian Federation. Let's discuss about interest groups, social movements, and protests. There are many interest groups in Russian Federation in almost all of its regions. These interest groups commonly represent the children's, the veterans, women, environmental advocates, pensioners, and even disabled individuals. Because of the rapid increase of movements, protests, and even interest groups in Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin signed a legislation in January 2006 amending laws on public association and non-commercial organization. This is actually a very controversial changes made by Putin because many of the Western government protested, since this law placed a new grounds for denying registration of organizations which are established or created on the basis of foreign finance or fundings. Another law was signed during 2012, which requires NGOs which are engaging in political activity on the basis again of foreign aid must register in foreign agent so that their activity will be strictly monitored by the Russian government. So they have to submit strict reporting requirements because Putin believed that this non-governmental organization fuel the political activism in Russian Federation, which might cause instability to their government. He believed that this organization were just being used as an instrument of many powerful countries, especially Western countries, so that they will going to influence the political system of the Russian Federation in one way or another. That's why Putin is very strict, or he put too much effort so that he could delimit the protests, the movements of many activists. So since there's a rapid increasing number of interest group, to respond on those, the government has attempted to channel public activism through official forums. For example, the established civic forum, which are organized by the government officials. And more recently is the public chamber created in 2005 through the proposed legislation of Vladimir Putin. In this forum, all voices of the citizens, all their problems, their queries in the government might be heard and might be addressed. This forums was initiated with an objective to generate public support for the government policy. So this is a strategy of Vladimir Putin so that he can get the sympathy of Russian citizens. In addition, in 2007, another changes was created. This is where the authorities have restricted, they tried to restrict the use of public demonstration and protest. That's why now Putin is accused for bringing the Russian Federation into a soft authoritarianism, because it seems that he's dictating everything and restricting most of the rights of the people in exchange for security. The presidential election in March 2012. This is actually the time when Vladimir Putin was elected again as president of Russian Federation. So just before the planned demonstration on June 12, 2012, which is named as the March of Millions, Putin signed again a new law which imposed high fines for participating in a demonstration that undermines public order or destroy public property. So during that time, even the house or the homes of leading opposition figures were also searched. Okay, let's proceed to the political impact of technology. Media has, a very important role, an insurmountable impact on how interests, on how sentiments of the people are being expressed. In Russia, in their constitution, Article 29, it guarantees freedom of the mass media and prohibit censorship, meaning the state or any political actor is prohibited to examine what is written or published in the newspapers. What is real. It should not be corrected. It should not be altered. However, it seems it is a paradox because Russia ranked 148 out of 179 countries in 2013 in terms of press freedom. That is according to Reporters Without Borders. There's also a recent survey by a respected independent public opinion agency. It revealed that 69% of the respondents acknowledge government censorship in main Russia TV channel, and 77% felt that it could be better if there are diverse views expressed in the media. Despite of the provisions in their constitution, in Russian constitution, still in Russia, if you are a journalist and you are a critic of the state, then you have to be very careful because your life will always be at risk because of the incapacity of the state to enforce the law and order. In 1992, there are estimated 52 journalists had been murdered. This is mostly associated with reporting in war about Chechnya, while others are contract murders or assassination. This make Russia as the third most dangerous country for the journalists in the world. So it seems ironic that there is a provision in their constitution that they respect freedom of the media, but then they're considered as third most dangerous country in the world for the journalists. For the opposing party or leaders in Russian Federation, internet is very important as an instrument to mobilize participation of various citizens in demonstration. This had happened during 2011 and 2012 election. So if there is a negative side of media for the government, there's also a positive side. And Russia is very strategic of using electronic media so that it could project a positive image abroad through the vehicles of global TV channel Russian Today and their internet site. So here, Russia is using the power of the media so that they can install and propagate the positive image of Russian Federation across borders. Okay, let's continue to the political challenges and changing agenda faced by the Russian Federation. There were various challenges, and one of it is that are Russian Federation going to step forward towards authoritarianism, or they will going to step backward and affirms to the liberal democratic principle and values. Many political scholars and political analysts are very skeptical, especially now that Russia is under a strongman hold in the person of Vladimir Putin, who are accused of bringing the Russia into soft authoritarianism because of various stringent measures that he is applying and doing in Russian Federation, especially in terms of people's participation and strict control to the media. Another challenge to Russian Federation is to reestablish its identity as a regional and global power. Are they will going to succeed to reestablish again their identity? So that's the challenge. Is Vladimir Putin capable of reestablishing again the identity of Russian Federation or not? Another challenge is that when Russian Federation annexed Crimea in 2014, it creates insecurities or security dilemma to its neighboring country because it was condemned by various western countries like United Kingdom and United States that the action of Russia is invalid and it violates the sovereignty of Ukraine. Ngayon, their neighboring countries is afraid magko-continue ba ang Russia sa ganong klase ng violation? Because since Russia is powerful, its military is powerful, and it has the maximum wealth, so it can easily invade its neighboring country. So that's why it creates security dilemma among its neighboring country.